I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 55. Today in the show, we're diving into the sticky topic of deer hunting politics, policies, and problems. So buckle up, because this one gets a little feisty. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by our friends at Sitka Gear. Now, today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be talking about deer hunting politics, policies, and problems. And we're doing this because the 2015 North American Deer Summit was held last week, and all three of those things were in focus at that event. So that said, I wanted to spend today recapping the North American Deer Summit and diving into the many different issues that were up for discussion and debate over the past few days. But before we get to all that, we've got something pretty important to discuss. My co-host and new dad of a little boy, Mr. Dan Johnson, is back on the podcast. Welcome back, bud.
I'm back.
You are. How's it feel?
I'm tired. I'm tired. Remember how we used to always be like, hey, what kind of beer are you drinking while we record the podcast? I'm drinking black coffee right now, if that tells you anything. Okay?
It does.
Second kid, don't do it. If your wife anybody says, hey, man, let's do the world a favor. Let's do our part and have a second kid. They're trying to trick you, okay? And that might just be the stress talking, but it's a change. A pace. I love him to death, and it's something. It's an awesome experience. But I got to tell you a quick little story. So my first child was a girl, right? Mm-hmm. And changing her diapers was easy. You have all systems go when you change a boy, because if you're not ready and prepared, you're getting a facial. You're getting rocket peas that are going like 4 or 5 foot. I mean, it's not just little dribbles. You think little baby who had little peas? No, they have grown man peas. And we've changed our bed sheets like 7, 8 times. So
now, is that because of you or the baby?
No, not me. I still got it together. But this little guy, his name's Mac, and he is just all he does. And literally eat, sleep, defecate, and pee. I mean, that's all he does.
So he's living the dream.
Oh yeah. If you could add deer hunting into that list of things to do, I would find that a great life.
Yeah, that's really all. Oh man. Well, that's awesome. But I don't envy the whole getting the pee in the face. But
you're gonna get it someday. You're gonna get it. I know your first kid's gonna be a boy, and his nickname's gonna be the Sprinkler.
If that's the case, I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah.
How's the little guy sleep?
Right now he's sleeping all the time, which is good. He'll wake up like at night. He'll wake up every 3 to 4 hours, and he'll cry, and we got to change his diaper and pee. And because my wife's off work, she's handling most of that. I sleep in the same room, so I'm up anyway.
Right.
But I'm like, ever since before I had kids, I could sleep through a tornado siren. But since I've had kids, I'm like on high alert all the time. So any squeak in the house, any little noise that the kids make, I'm up and like ready to attack. I don't know what it is. It's just like some kind of instinct has taken over me. So
That's like the biggest thing that worries me is like I don't function when I don't have like relatively consistent sleep, and I'm panicking already about waking up every 2 hours and getting like 4 hours of sleep every night.
let me tell you what I compare it to. Okay, you got your 2 week rut vacation, and you're about 7 days into your hunt. You're hunting every morning, you're hunting every night. There's days you're sitting in stand all day long, got that fresh air, and you're just like almost a zombie,
Yeah.
but you still keep going. That is what it's like right now for me.
Ugh. Man. That's I know that feeling, and it's brutal.
Yeah. Yep. So that's the best way I can put it to people who don't have kids is that kind of tired. You're worn out. I mean, you're not, when you think of deer hunting, what are you really doing physically? If you're a tree stand hunter, you're setting up, you're tearing down, but then you just sit in one spot for hours at a time. Here you're just sitting, you're not doing too much physical activity, but you're drained, and I just want it to be over.
Yeah, a long time, man.
Yeah, no doubt, right?
So, what's the best thing about this? Like, is there any good thing? I'm assuming there is.
Oh yeah, man. Just like my daughter is a character, and watching her grow up and get a personality is an amazing thing. Like I love her so much, and just she's gonna be a firecracker just like her mom, but she sings all the time, and watching her develop physically and mentally, she's gonna be smart too. And then my son, just like if you've ever watched a birth, like I was there, I was holding the legs, I was watching the head come out of the vagina and all that stuff that goes along with it. Hey, this is real talk, man.
You're right. This is real talk.
and watching your child actually be born is a life-changing event. And it's just like you don't get grossed out, you don't get nauseous, you just sit there and you look at it and you're like, I'm a man, I made that. And the cool thing about a boy is like it's almost like historical. It's because that son will someday carry on your legacy, right? He's going to carry your name for the rest of his life, and hopefully he can be better than I was, just like I can try to be better than my dad.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a pride. It's pride. It's like that is my son. I hope he turns out to be a great man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's
Yeah.
as much as kids scare the crap out of me, given everything you've told me over the last year.
Yeah.
I am really looking forward to that.
And I bitch a lot. I mean, I bitch and complain a lot about not my kids, but having kids, if that makes sense. But there's nothing I would rather do, than spend time with them and hang out with them. And it's cool because my daughter, she wants to be outside all the time. And I absolutely love that she's interested in the outdoors already.
Yeah,
so I'm pumped to this summer get her out fishing for the very first time and, get her dirty and get her used to it. So I can, basically have a hunter in training under my belt,
It's pretty cool. Well, I'm sure you're gonna do a great job raising your new son and your soon to be a fishing hunting daughter. So
Yep.
pretty pumped for you, buddy.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's get talking about this though.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah. There was so much that happened last week. And so I haven't really been able to I don't know what the right word is, not decompress, but Gosh, it's like when you come back from like a battle and you come back to the main base and you have to sit back and have a meeting about what happened.
Yeah.
What's that word?
It's like you're not yet absorbed everything that actually happened.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out my word, but yes, to what you said,
Yeah.
I still haven't just processed it all. And I
Yeah.
think if we can talk about it today, I think that's going to help me process it, and hopefully it's going to be something that's helpful to everyone listening too, because there's a lot of things happening in the deer hunting world. We've talked about this a little bit, in some of our past episodes. I think it was, I guess I don't remember what number, but earlier this year we had Kip Adams talk about the state of whitetails, and he talked about a lot of the different challenges in the deer hunting world right now. And then a couple weeks later, we had Dr. Grant Woods on the show, and he talked about some of the ways that we can, deal with some of these challenges. But last week at the 2015 North American Deer Summit, we were taking a look at these challenges from a really big picture view. So not just, how do I deal with too many coyotes on my property, but this is how do we deal with the things that are affecting all deer hunters and deer hunting agencies, or wildlife agencies, and the hunting industry, and everything at the very, very highest level. What are these big problems or policies or political issues that are going to impact you and me and everyone listening? And that's kind of a big deal.
Yep.
And I think for the first time, well, I don't think this really is the first time, in the past year, where the larger deer hunting community has come together to discuss these issues and talk about, what can we do as a community to address them. So it's really kind of historical, and it's kind of neat to be a part of that. And so what I want to do today, Dan, was really quickly, I'll just recap, how we got to this point. We've talked about it a little bit. But just for anyone who hasn't followed along with this the past year, I want to talk a little bit about what happened last year with the very first deer summit that ever happened, and then how that led to this event last week. And then we can, what I thought I'd do is I could walk us through all the main things that happened at the summit, talk about, what the different speakers had to say or what the different debates were. And then, I think we can just kind of explore each of those different issues. I'm interested in sharing some of my opinions on it, and would, of course, love to hear what you think about some of these things. And, my end goal is to make sure everyone out there understands what happened, make sure everyone, feels educated on what these different issues are, and then hopefully can maybe give us all a little bit of encouragement to take action on some of these things. And we can talk about how we can make sure our voice is heard, and make sure that what our hopes and thoughts are for where we see the deer hunting community going. Hopefully we can make change and make sure that happens. So that's kind of my high level ambitious goals for the next hour, but I think we can do it. What do you think?
Let's get the party started, Mark.
Yeah, I think we should. So a real quick history recap, Dan, and you tell me, I think you know most of this, but if not, feel free to, ask me other more questions. But as we've talked about before, lots of different challenges that have been impacting the deer hunting world. In 2007 and in 2012, we had the largest EHD, that's a very common deer disease, outbreaks, and that caused a whole massive, really die-off of deer across many parts of the country. So that happened recently. We've had, as we talked about a couple weeks ago with Kip Adams, declining deer harvests across many parts of the country, especially the Midwest. We've had some historically difficult winters that cause a lot of winter kill. We've had increased levels of predators in many parts of the country, which is causing, much lower fawn recruitment rates. We've had all these things going on. Plus, we've had a number of controversies around, captive deer. We've had controversies around, how many doe permits should be allowed. All sorts of different things like that have just caused kind of a climax of concern around deer hunting. And so coming out of that, which really started reaching a peak in, after the 2013 season, the Quality Deer Management Association decided to put on an event that brought together really everyone involved in the deer world and bring them all to one place, the key stakeholders, bring them all in one place and talk about what's going on. So that was the 2014 North American Deer Summit, and that was an invite-only event which brought together some of a number of the different wildlife agencies, so state fish and game agencies. It brought together representatives of different conservation and advocacy organizations in the hunting world. It brought together the hunting media. It brought together a bunch of people that represent companies in the hunting industry. It brought just regular hunters, and I think I'm missing one other category. Academia, so different people within the deer research community. brought all these different people together to talk about, okay, what's going on here? And so the big takeaways coming out of that event were identifying, okay, what are the issues that we're concerned about right now? What are the things impacting deer? And then, what's our next step? And one of the biggest thing that came out of that was that there needed to be a national organization to represent deer hunters and deer at a large national level, and one that could advocate on behalf of all of us. And that's something that currently isn't there. Dan, there's the Quality Deer Management Association, which is a great organization, but they represent a smaller subsegment of the deer hunting population, of people that are involved in a certain type of management. There's Whitetails Unlimited, and they represent deer hunters and some advocacy on a grassroots level. But there really isn't just an overarching group that kind of fits all deer hunters. And so, as you know, and as we've talked about before on the podcast, the National Deer Alliance was created this past summer. And I won't, go into more details about what that is because we've talked about it before. But coming out of that, the National Deer Alliance has now partnered with the Quality Deer Management Association, Whitetails Unlimited, and the Mule Deer Federation or Foundation. I can't remember which. That's bad. So the three major deer groups are now working in partnership with the National Deer Alliance to tackle these larger deer issues. And so that's what the 2015 North American Deer Summit was to bring all of those stakeholders back together. Now the National Deer Alliance has been created. That's step number one. Now this event this past week was talking about, okay, let's identify what the absolute most important issues are for the NDA, the National Deer Alliance. What are those most important issues for the NDA to start actually making immediate impacts on? And then number two, let's talk about actual action items. So what are the specific things that we need to do to address those issues? So at a high level, that was the goal of this event. It was a 3-day event. It was like an all-day thing, and it was a lot of stuff going on. So I think that puts us in a position where we can kind of, I think, have hopefully some good context of what this is all about. Right. So
I got a real quick question for you.
Yeah.
It's actually pertains to this. It's two questions actually. Well, one's a comment. This one that you were at this past week was open to the public, correct?
That is correct.
Huge gripe for me is that it was a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday event, correct?
That is correct.
And so right there, you're kind of isolating people who have to work away from this job, away from that, because I would have loved to be at that event, but I would have had to take in vacation days to do it. If I was, obviously, if there's people out there who are really serious about doing it, just like certain trade shows, I know it's more of a business type thing to have it during the week, but I felt that something like this should have been held on a weekend. So a majority of people, like more public, I have a feeling would have attended. And then you get a larger sample size of what individuals' issues are.
Yeah. I agree with you. I definitely think that was something that impacted the amount of participation. And then another thing, I lost my train of thought. What was your second question?
My second question was turnout. I want to know, were the people that were there, was it public, or were they all a part of that the Mule Deer Federation or the Whitetails Unlimited or Quality Deer Management or some state and game agency, or was there a mixture of people there? I mean, I have some notes here. Like I remember texting you this weekend and saying, are there certain who's there? And you said the majority of the people are the behind the scenes people. So like, I think I asked you hunting industry people, like were any celebrities there? Were any like business people there? Like, let's say, for example, the owner of Realtree, like was Bill Jordan there, or anybody similar to him that has more of a financial reason to be there as opposed to, because in one of the articles I read, $45 billion a year is created by whitetail hunting alone in that industry.
Yeah. It's huge. It's huge. So yeah, to your question, a lot of good stuff there. Turnout was several hundred, I think between 200 and 300, somewhere around there. And the survey, we did a survey at the very beginning. This was really interactive, so it was voting done throughout the event, and we had these little clickers where we had to punch in our answers to these different questions. It was about evenly split, almost perfectly evenly split, if I remember correctly, between industry representatives, which would be like owners of companies or representatives of a company. So between industry, between media, between conservation organization people, which would be like a QDMA person or whatever, and regular hunters, just a person who has no other affiliation except for being a hunter, and whatever the other couple are. The only one that had a much smaller portion was the academics, so like the people just from a university that are researchers or something.
Right.
So I don't know if it was something like, if it was 300, whatever that 300 divided by 6 groups or 5 groups of different type of people was, that's about what the split was. Now,
Gotcha.
I think 2 things. I think, to your point, if it was a different part of the week, if it was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday or something, I think there would have been a lot more of just your general public hunter, which would have been great. But number 2, just in general, I was disappointed with the turnout, especially from people who are, particularly invested in this community. So like you said, hunting celebrities. There wasn't, and I'm going to kind of call out I'm not going to call out specific people, but I'm just going to call out the general TV hunting media group of people out there, right? These are quote unquote celebrities who make a living from the hunting industry. They make a living from deer, and they're a big deal because of it. I didn't see a single person. Well, the only person from a TV show I saw there was Steven Ranella, who was there as a speaker and a leader, in ways. But other than him, there was not a single person that I saw from the TV world there to talk about, to be involved at all in this discussion. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but was he paid to be there? Was he paid to speak? Yeah, those main keynote speakers, I'm sure were paid. I don't know details about it, but that's my assumption.
Right.
So that said, where are these big famous TV guys that their whole world and living depends on this? Why aren't they here caring about these issues? Why aren't they standing up and offering opinions or offering support or talking about ways that they can help? Why is it only just the people that do research and the people that run the conservation organizations and a select group of people that manage these companies and a handful of hunters? Where were more people? I think this is really some important shit that was being talked about.
Yeah.
And I don't think people were stepping up to be a part of it.
No, that's huge. That's huge.
And I I understand with the general hunting public, it's tough to get out of work. It's tough to, pay there was some amount of money that cost to go to the summit, which was, it wasn't like $20. It was like $100 or $150 or something like that. So it's not like a cheap thing. So I understand that the average guy or girl might not be able to come. Although I hope in the future there'll be more. There has to be more. But when it comes to these big name people who have some money and they have the time and their whole livelihood and they claim their passion is around this animal, why aren't they a part of these discussions? Why aren't they sacrificing a little bit of time and energy to be a part of the solution? I personally was very disappointed in that, and it's unlikely that any of them are listening. But if any of them are listening, I hope that they would consider the importance of being involved in these things, because if stuff hits the fan and deer hunting or deer hunting populations or deer hunting regulations or whatever it might be, if those things start going down the drain in some way that they don't see happy about, I guarantee they're going to be throwing a fit about it and complaining. Lots of people will be, but are they actually taking an active step to be a part of the solution? So far, I haven't seen it. There are some people who are stepping up and to agree. I don't want to cast the blame on everyone, but I just like to encourage everyone and anyone listening, whether you're in the industry or you're a celebrity or you're an average guy, be involved, I think is my main message here. Let's all take a step up ourselves and not just expect someone else to deal with it.
Right. And that's the thing, I was at the booth at the ATA show, and you have all these, the backdrop of the booth is all these celebrities or who's who in the hunting industry saying that they support the the NDA, but not actually there to support the NDA.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people who would, I don't want to be too quick to point fingers because everyone's got their reasons for whatever. But in general, I'm not seeing a lot of active support from some of these people that say they support. Yeah. And I wish that wasn't the case, and I hope that will change.
Well, and it's not just celebrities either.
Right.
It's all people.
All people.
Yep.
So that's my first rant of what might be a lot of rants today, because this is one of those topics where I'm ready to rant. So
Yep.
get ready for that, Dan.
Hey, I'm ready to rant too.
Because we're talking politics, policies, and problems, and that's stuff
Yep.
that gets people fired up. So,
Yep.
so all right, I thought maybe I'll just start day one. I'll walk us through some of the different topics of each day that I remember, and then we can kind of dive into each one of those as you or I see fit. So, the first part of day one, right? We got everyone together in this great big convention hall, and the first thing we talked about were the state of whitetails and the state of mule deer in North America. So I don't think we need to dive, too far into that, because, a few podcasts ago, Kip, shared with us essentially a synopsis of the current state of whitetails, and he was the speaker who gave this talk at the summit as well. So you and me, I think, I think anyone listening, they know the bullet points. I'll give a really quick overview. If you're looking at deer populations and harvest rates across the country, in some parts of the country, it's normal, it's kind of fine and dandy. And then in other parts of the country, it's getting to like crisis mode. We're seeing some dramatic reductions, more dramatic than we've seen in recent history by far. So those areas of concern right now, the biggest is the Midwest. So in the Midwest, overall harvest, I believe, is down 20% over the past decade. In some states, like in Iowa, buck harvest, or maybe it's overall harvest, is down 40%. Gosh, I wish I had these numbers in front of me. I should have grabbed the numbers. But there's something, a dramatic number of states in the Midwest are down over 20% in harvest.
Yeah, 23%.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So there's a lot of situations like that that's causing concern. And as I mentioned at the front end, those different things, disease, predation, predators, winters, habitat loss, a whole bunch of different things are being discussed as what might be the issues related to that. But those are things that are all causing concern in the state of whitetails. And then there's other things, outside of just the general, well-being of whitetail populations. There's things that are affecting, deer hunters. So, hunting access, hunting, the perception of hunters and what that means for the non-hunting public's, voting habits regarding hunting. There's some different things related, like I mentioned, habitat loss. There's massive amounts of habitat being developed or put into production right now at a scale that hasn't been seen in a long time. I think 9 million acres in the Midwest were taken out of CRP. And so, as you know, Dan, CRP is amazing deer habitat. And a ton of it over the last decade, a dramatic amount, has been taken out of that habitat and put into crops, which, do not provide quality habitat for deer most of the year. So that's been a huge thing that's affecting deer across states like Iowa and the Dakotas and places like that, where there's tons of ground being put into corn or different things like that. So a whole bunch of things like that are causing some concerns within the whitetail world. Recently, past decade, really the past handful of years is when, you and me and most other people have been noticing these things. As far as mule deer, really quickly, they had a number of things occur in the mule deer world with like the late 90s that caused a lot of deer population crashes, and they really haven't recovered much since then. So they've been kind of been dealing with an ongoing crisis of sorts within the mule deer world that is still an issue now. And so now that the National Deer Alliance has been created, we're working on behalf of all deer. So we're, as a larger deer community, we'll be hopefully trying to help what the Mule Deer Foundation has been battling for the past 20, 30 years. But that's a big thing we talked about, day one.
I know that when I went to Nebraska this past year to hunt mule deer and antelope and whitetail, that I did a little research and they actually opened up more, even though the numbers were not good enough to sustain, they wanted to kill as many whitetails in specific areas as possible to allow the mule deer to come back into that area. Yeah. Because something about just the way they are, whitetails tend to be more aggressive and can push mule deer out of specific areas. So that's one example. Yeah,
that was one of the examples they talked about too. In general, it seems like mule deer are just much more susceptible to habitat loss and increased competition from other species, whether that's whitetails or elk, and a whole bunch of different things have made mule deer. It's made the last 10, 20, 30 years a challenge for mule deer. So that's a topic for another podcast or another episode. But the next topic of conversation is a big debate over the last few years, and that's captive deer. There was a panel discussion about what was called the captive cervid industry, which I felt was just a PC way of talking about high fence deer farming and breeding.
Yep.
And this panel involved an evenly split group of people. It was a handful of people from the deer breeding side of things. There was a biologist, and then there was I'm going to get this wrong. I'm not prepared with my notes. But the president of the North American Deer Farmers Association, I believe, I think that was his title, Sean Schaefer. And then there was a representative from the Southeast deer disease group, something along these lines. There's a guy there's a disease expert. There was a guy that was a member of the board or the member of association for the deer farming. There was another biologist that sounded like he was from Texas and was involved in that industry. And then there was another person who was representing Texans for our hunting heritage or something along those lines. And she was speaking on behalf of reform in the captive deer industry, so against high fence canned hunting for the most part. Mm-hmm. So there was these 4 different people, and I was expecting, for the most part, most of the people that I assumed are part of the National Deer Alliance. And I think if you talk to most of the average deer hunters outside of the far south and like Texas, most people are not in favor of high fence hunting and a lot of these deer breeding facilities and things where there's, all this genetic mutation and these monster deer that are then shot in pens and stuff. So I was expecting some pretty strong debates, and I was expecting a little bit of some fireworks. And it really kicked off. There was a facilitator for the panel discussion. He kind of kicked it off by saying, we're all going to be acting respectful here. We're all going to be, we're going to act like adults. We're going to treat each other like ladies and gentlemen, and we expect everyone here to be treated that way. So it was kind of set up like, yikes, this could get feisty. But it didn't really ever get there. And in general, I felt like we got sidetracked. So the leading speaker was this gentleman, Sean Schaefer, from like I said, I think it's the North American Deer Farmers Association. And he spoke about chronic wasting disease, which is a big concern for a lot of people in the deer hunting community. And he talked about some of the different research and experiences that have been looked into from their side of the quote-unquote, or no pun intended, on their side of the fence. And really I felt like he opened up the discussion. And by leading this whole discussion down the path of talking about CWD, it kind of tainted the whole discussion. The whole debate really ended up just being about CWD, and if CWD is being actively transmitted to wild populations by virtue of high-fenced captive herds. Mm-hmm. And so really a big part of the conversation was just Sean Schaefer sharing, their side's view, and then this other gentleman, John Fisher, I believe, sharing the view from a more scientific basis on the non-high fence side, talking about the real concerns that he has, and that various experts have about, the risk that CWD poses to high fence or to native herds. And then it kind of went back and forth on that, and just lots of semantics. I really thought there needed to be a greater conversation about the ethics of what's going on here, mm-hmm. and how that's going to impact all deer hunters, regardless of if we participate in high fence facilities or hunting. And the one representative, Jenny, from the Texans for Protecting Our Hunting Heritage, her main point was just that there are some very serious concerns from a public perception standpoint, because I think the most recent survey showed that 80% of Americans are in support in general of hunting. Yes. But when we're asked about specific reasons for hunting, so when we ask for something like trophy hunting, it plummets to less than 20% of people are in support of that. Yeah. And then if you ask for canned hunting, it's minuscule. Almost no one would be in support of that. But the issue, that I've seen and heard is that when people see a canned hunt, or it's talked about in the media, or somebody talks about that, it's that just is hunting. That's in their eyes. That's that's what all hunters do. That's what these people are doing. No way can we support that. No way should Mark and Dan be able to go out there and shoot deer. They're just raising these giant nasty bucks and fences and shooting them like, ducks in a barrel or fish in a barrel. And so, my big concern here is that if we're not distancing ourselves, and I have a very strong stance on this, I'm very much against these captive deer breeding facilities where they're genetically and selectively breeding these deer for mega racks and raising them like livestock and then selling them off to the highest bidder to be shot in some small enclosure. That's not hunting. That's not representative of what I love and what you love and what 99% of deer hunters out there, are passionate about. And I have very strong concerns about what it means for the public perception. And also there's very strong disease concerns that, I mentioned earlier. So my super high level opinion on the whole debate was that I wish we talked more about that. I wish we hadn't talked so much just about, does this disease do this or not? Because it got bogged down in that. And I thought there were bigger issues.
Right. And I bet you no one from the captive deer industry, stepped up and said, hey, let me talk, because they were there, I had a feeling, to just be there so there was some kind of representation. They were prepared if the ball was put in their court, so to speak, but why would they bring it up if it wasn't brought up? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think and I know, there's going to be people listening, that have hunted high fence enclosures, and maybe it's, it's a 20,000 acre enclosure and it's very much like free range, and they're not in it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I understand everyone's situation, and I've never been a part of that. So I'm not going to try to judge everyone, but I will very strongly and confidently say that, the freak mutation selective breeding, I'm against that. And I'm very much against the very small enclosures, or where they have a deer in a pen raised to be a giant and then they release him, and then within an hour or 15 minutes or a day or two, then they send a hunter out into the 100-acre pen and then shoot him. That's just, in my personal opinion, that's not hunting. And right. I am personally not in support of that. So, I think the representative from the deer farmers world, I think they were smart in steering the conversation just towards like a tit for tat semantics discussion about CWD, and they kind of kept it away from getting to those other parts of the conversation, which I think are harder for them to defend.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver, off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish, or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
What specifically, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, because let's say a giant pen down in Texas or in any other state, hell, it could be next to your hunting property. And let's take disease out of the equation for a second. How does that affect you as a hunter?
So if disease is out of the equation,
Yep.
and if this is just are we talking like a big?
It is, let's say, who cares what the size is? Let's say it is, we got one to your left and it's 3,000 acres, and one to your right and it's 100 acres where they have a stable. They raise the buck and they let it into 100 acres, and the guy shoots it with a rifle.
Okay. So here's other than the risk of disease, here's my two major qualms with that. Number one, the North American model of wildlife conservation. This is like the bedrock philosophy that all of hunting and conservation in America is based on. This was developed back in the early 20th century by like the likes of Theodore Roosevelt and these guys that were the forefathers of what we're doing here. And they talked about the fact that there's a few basic principles that should guide game management and hunting and conservation in this country. And one of those big, important, unique principles, which makes the United States and Canada, to a degree, completely different than anywhere else in the world, like Europe. In Europe, the everyman, regular people, they don't get to hunt very much because wildlife is considered private property. So it used to be a thing of just the rich, the elite, the big elites, the people who had a lot of money and land. They got to hunt their deer that they owned on their private land, and then everyone else that didn't own that land had no wildlife to hunt. They couldn't go on these other places to harvest a deer because that'd be taking private property. So what was very different about here in America is that wildlife was deemed to be in the public trust. So wildlife can never be private property. A deer on property that you might own a piece of land in, but that wildlife, that deer is public. No one can own that deer. And that's been, one of the absolute bedrock, most important parts of what it means to be an American and a hunter and to be part of this way of life. Now when you take a fence and you put a fence around your 100 acres or even your 20,000 acres, and now you take that deer herd and now you start selling that deer herd, you are essentially taking that deer out of the public trust. That deer is no longer available to me or available to be viewed by me or whatever it might be, and now you're putting a price tag on it, and then you're using it as private property for yourself. Whether that happened, 50 years ago or yesterday, there are significant issues there from basic principles of the North American model.
What's the difference between that and an outfitter who owns 2,000 some acres, low fence, and is highly, highly managed?
So, the biggest thing is that those deer aren't private. They don't have the only access to it. They are not confined to a place. Now, yes, people make money off of those deer to a degree, but it is not a private, locked-in set. These deer are in this one place. They can't move. They can't cross the boundaries. It's blurry, right? There's some gray. There's some shades of gray there, and that's something that raises questions. But I think when you have a high fence, when you take these deer completely within your possession, and then you start selling them off like livestock, managing and selling them off like livestock, that raises significant, just basic principle issues.
Right.
The second issue then goes back to what I said earlier, which is the fact that high fence breeding facilities and canned hunting is going to be a significant problem for fair chase regular hunters like me because of what outsiders will think. Mm-hmm. We'll get to this in a second, but the two of the top 5 issues that were identified at the summit, one was hunter recruitment, and one was the public perception of hunting and what that will mean for how people will vote and how people will treat hunters and what that will mean for the future of hunting. So those are two of the top 5 issues. If canned hunting, where we have these 350-inch bucks that live in a pen and then are shot the next day, if that's something that non-hunters see, that number one, significantly negatively impacts their perception of hunting, and number two, that turns away potential new hunters. That's not something that a guy living in New York City that wants to start killing his own food is going to see and be like, oh yeah, I want to try that. Hell no. That's going to turn off a lot of people. So right off the bat, if those are two important issues that the Deer Alliance and the Summit has agreed upon, I don't see how that they can be in support of something like canned hunting or some of these freak breeding practices.
Do you think that, and I'm spitballing here, do you think that that a high fence company should, you know, if we're so concerned with what the public thinks, non-hunters think of high fence, quote unquote, hunting, do you think that there could potentially be in the future rules put in place to where a high fence facility could say we are not a hunting facility, and have put in rules and regulations to tell everybody we are not an official hunting, we don't do this, we are, basically call them out and tell them what they really are.
Right. This is a shooting facility.
This is or something along those lines, to let them continue to make their money, which is what they want to do. Right. The high fence industry, in my opinion, is all about making money. And that's when you take that out of the equation, then it's not, it's a huge deal. That's all they're concerned about. It's a business to them, as opposed to a resource like what me and you are used to. So, getting it to where, we do not represent those kind of companies. The NDA does not represent those kind of companies. We don't do this. We don't do this. They're on their own. If you're going to think about hunting, don't think about them. Think about us. Have a mission statement and all those things, to where we're not trying to cut somebody out of the equation, but yet say we are in no way associated with you, and we feel that you do not represent hunters in the United States.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll say before I dive into that, just to clarify here, is everything that I'm saying here is my own personal Mark Kenyon opinion. It's not representative of the National Deer Alliance. It's not representative of any companies that I know or that we work with or anything. This is just me spitballing my own personal opinion, and we're all, we all have our own opinion. So that said, to your question, Dan, I think that's something that was definitely talked about, and those were some of the major concerns that came out of this discussion, because after this whole panel discussion, the next day was when everyone at the summit voted on their top issues. And another of the top 5 issues, I mentioned already that hunter recruitment and public perception were 2 of those 5. Another of those top 5 was just this, the captive deer industry. So we had conversations then on day 3 about what potential action items there could be to address this issue of the captive deer industry and what its implications are on deer and deer hunters across the country. And some of the things that were talked about were just what you said, like trying to institute some kind of common terminology. What do we call? Do we reference these canned hunts as hunts, or can we, qualify them as something different, shoots or whatever? There's a whole bunch of conversations about different semantics in that regards. Can we put different regulations on them? Can we make sure that it's spoken about in different ways so that it doesn't appear to be as associated with hunting or with real hunting? There was a lot of things like that, but I unfortunately wasn't able to be a part of that part of the discussion. I was interviewing someone outside of the main convention hall for that, when they talked about that one issue. But what I would have loved to see someone say, which nobody did say, was what you just brought up, being us distancing ourselves from that part of the quote-unquote industry and saying, hey, that's not hunting. That's not representative of deer and deer hunters across the country. And we want to make sure that's something that is clearly understood by everyone. In my personal opinion, that would be the right choice.
Exactly. And that's what although we do not, from an ethics standpoint, we do not consider that hunting. We considering that basically livestock harvesting,
right?
Taking a cow and shooting it in the head and then cutting it up and eating it,
right?
Because that's my opinion of what it is. But I also, from an economic standpoint, I feel that, and I know this is where the line gets kind of gray, but everybody has the right to start a business and make money and make them happy. That pursuit of happiness, so to speak. And if you're not hurting anybody, then I feel that you should be able to continue to do what you want to do. But asterisk here, if what you're doing plays a direct threat through disease to our natural resource, shut them down, get them out.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, there's a lot of gray areas, and I don't, neither of us can claim that we understand it from all sides of the view, from all points of view. So we're offering our perspective on this, but I think you're absolutely right. I think, when the implications of what's happening there starts impacting the greater public resource, or by virtue of perception and impacting other people's opinions and causes greater harm to everyone, that's when I start getting concerned about it. Yep. And that's why I have these concerns. So they're concerns. That's my opinion. That's where I wish things had gone. At least I wish that discussion was had. I didn't think that that it went quite into that as much as maybe would have liked to seen. But we'll see. There's if I'm looking right here at the action items. So what happened was we talked about each one of the major 5 issues, which I'll get to the rest of them in a second. But then on that final day of the summit, then the larger group, brought up different potential action items that we could take to address that issue. So I'll just read off the ones that were suggested when it comes to the captive deer industry. One was to advocate to ensure that deer are classified as wildlife and not livestock. That's been a debate that's been happening in a bunch of states over the last year, Dan. I don't know if you've seen any of the news posted on the National Deer Alliance Facebook page or emails or anything like that, but a number of states, like in Indiana, I think, Missouri, North Carolina, West Virginia, they've been debating, should deer be classified as wildlife or as livestock? And then by virtue of that, should they be managed by the Fish and Game agencies, or should they be managed by the Department of Agriculture?
Right.
And that
Which is crazy. And specifically for Missouri, I think that captive elk are under the agriculture and deer are under the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. So it just doesn't make sense why one animal is under one agency and the other animal is under the other agency when the goal is kind of the same thing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of debates going on about that. So one of the major things talked about was, like, most everyone who talked at the event said that they believe that they should be classified and managed as wildlife. We talked more. There's more discussion about partnering with trying to get more disease research, trying to better understand what the disease implications are. There was a lot of talk about developing a standard list of terminology to be used regarding the captive deer industry, development of best management practices regarding trying to set some, like you said, some kind of regulations for these facilities. When it comes to how long these animals need to be released before they can be hunted, what kind of chemicals can be used on them, all sorts of different things like that, which in general is just a messy thing. But they're talking about trying to regulate that more, partnering with more NGOs, NGOs that foster fair chase and animal welfare, talking about the fact that wildlife agencies should be managing the animals and not state departments of ag, conducting surveys regarding the opinions on the captive cervid industry to better understand what the wider population thinks and believes, advocating to make sure that hunters better understand what's going on in these facilities, a whole bunch of different things like that. So there's a bunch of little ideas and stuff like that, but it wasn't like major action was discussed. So I don't know where it's all going. It's a sticky subject, lots of opinions. Everyone usually has a very strong opinion on it. But it was one of those big things that we talked about.
Right.
But I worry we're talking a lot about this. So
yeah.
So real quick, the other major issues, which was what day 2 was really focused on, was talking about the other top issues and then voting on what were the most important ones and then brainstorming action items. So a couple quick things about those other top issues that were discussed. On the front end, there were some speakers. So there was a speaker that discussed disease, so some of the different things happening when it comes to disease in deer. There was a speaker that discussed the impact of predators on deer. There was someone who spoke about hunter and wildlife agency relations, which is definitely a challenge at times. How regular average Joe hunters and the DNR or Department of Fish and Game, interface and get along. And then there was a talk about hunter recruitment and how can we get more people into the hunting ranks and enjoy what we do. So there was a whole bunch of speakers discussing all those things. The Cliff Notes version of each of those talks, when it comes to disease, chronic wasting disease is a scary one with lots of unknowns. It's popping up more and more places. There's strong beliefs that the transportation of captive deer across states and all over the place is causing a lot of this spread, because what happens is when one of these animals gets infected, CWD is transferred by virtue of contact with some kind of fluid. So it's a prion. It's a messed up prion, which is like, I think, some portion of a protein that, if it's on the ground, if deer are feeding on the ground and their saliva is eating like a pile of corn, and if there's one deer eating that pile of corn, any other deer that comes and eats near that one spot could pick up that prion and then become infected themselves. So then when you have these deer moving all over the place and then being put in these captive facilities where they're all eating out of the same little bucket or whatever, there's a high rate of transfer, which is why one of the big reasons and the concerns that people are worried about what might happen with that industry. So that was the big things with CWD. Lots of questions around that. Dr. Grant Woods actually had a bunch of questions about that. He wasn't speaking, but he stood up and asked some questions to the people on the earlier panel I talked about, talking about the fact that there is a way to test for CWD on a deer, and you can see if it's positive. You can get a positive, but there's no negative result. So it's either positive or undetermined. Like, you can't 100% verify if a deer does not have it. So they aren't even able to properly test these animals yet. So there's just lots of unknowns. So that's the big thing with CWD. The other major disease is hemorrhagic disease, which is an umbrella name for EHD, which is epizootic hemorrhagic disease, and the blue tongue virus. They essentially have the same symptoms. So when you say EHD, usually people are thinking of the same thing. As you know, Dan, and most everyone listening, within the last 5 years, 2007, 2012, we had those huge outbreaks across a lot of different states, particularly states like Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, and that's where these deer, end up finding lots of dead deer near water sources because they get a fever and they go there, and then that's where they end up dying. So the big takeaway with EHD, or HD, is that it's moving north, and the belief is that it can't be proven yet, but it just seems like it is moving north due to changes in climate, because the big agent of transfer for HD is a midge, a little tiny bug that carries the disease. And typically, when there's droughts, more deer are going to go to water, the smaller limited sources of water when there's a drought, and that's where the midges are. And so transfer becomes much more rapid. So you get much more intense outbreaks of the disease, which is like what we had in Michigan in 2012, where we had the worst drought we've had in a long time, and then that coincided with this massive outbreak of HD. So that was another big discussion item. That's the headline for disease. Now, before we get into the next topic, though, we first need to pause briefly to thank our friends at Sitka Gear for their support of the Wired to Hunt podcast. Now, last week I shared with you guys the story of how I discovered Sitka. And since that point, I've been able to use a lot of different pieces of Sitka gear as I've chased whitetails, turkeys, and elk across the country. And over these past 5 years or so, one of my favorite things about their gear is just the attention to detail. Just like I'm obsessed with the details when it comes to hunting whitetails, Sitka is obsessed about the details when designing the clothes we hunt in. Take, for example, their Fanatic jacket and the little added detail of placing specific pockets for a rangefinder and grunt tube on your chest. And that grunt tube even has a little, mesh bottom, so that if you don't even take it out of the pocket and just bend your head down to blow on that grunt, that sound can get out. Or in their new Fanatic hoodie, it's got a built-in face mask that pulls out from inside the hood, and actually flip over hand mitts. It's kind of hard to describe, but they're awesome. Over and over, I see examples of this. Just these little things they add to a product that make a big difference. And every tiny aspect of a piece of gear that they put out there, it's thought through all the way, and it just shows. And when it comes to chasing big mature whitetails, I'm looking for every advantage I can get, even when it comes to the little details in my clothing. And that is exactly why I use Sitka gear. But now, back to the show and the next topic. Any questions on the disease stuff, Dan?
I just want to make one quick point about, and this portion of the disease transferred by, taking deer across state lines and high fence should just further the fact that these high fence operations need way more regulations and control of their practice, because it is it's a fact that, that there, I shouldn't say fact, but high statistics that what they're doing is affecting our natural resource. The only difference between raising a cow and raising a deer to be quote unquote hunted in a high fence is the way it's killed. One by a guy in a tree stand with a rifle, the other one in a chute with a hammer over their head. It's the only difference. They're selective bred, and they're put into a cage to shoot.
Yeah.
So and the USDA has so many guidelines and regulations for hogs, chickens, and all these things that when an outbreak, for example, in Iowa this year, there was I want to say over 10,000 turkeys that were killed because one bird tested positive for the bird virus.
Yeah.
So all these birds were wiped out to kind of control that. I feel that that's the same stance that needs to happen in these high fence operations.
Yeah, and I don't understand. I know there is regulation of them to some degree. I just don't know all the details of that.
Right.
So what I do know is that one of the points that was brought up in this conversation was that, when it comes to the debate of who should manage these, should it be the Department of Ag or should it be the wildlife agencies? One person's point, and I think it was someone who represented a wildlife agency, I believe, he said that, well, the wildlife agency, they can focus on deer. Deer is the most important resource for a wildlife agency. Whether it's captive or not, it impacts the overall resource, which is the biggest driver. For the Department of Ag, if the Department of Ag starts regulating deer, it becomes like the tiniest little fish in a huge, huge pond. Because you've got cattle, pork, chickens, turkeys, all these massive, massive industries, and the deer aspect of that would be a very minor portion of that. And the concern is that if the Department of Ag starts managing it, that they wouldn't pay it as much attention, and then that's why a lot of the captive deer advocates want the Department of Ag to manage it. So I don't know. I don't know the details. I don't have that perspective. I don't know, but that's one thing to think about, and that's one of the concerns people had.
Yep.
So that's disease. Predators were another big topic. The headline for the predator discussion was just that predator and deer relationship, so the predator-prey relationship, is complex. It's different everywhere. It's different based on habitat. It's different based on population size. It's different based on a whole slew of different things. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no one-size-fits-all diagnosis. In some places, coyote populations aren't really damaging deer herds. In some places, they are. In some places, black bears make a huge impact. In some places, they don't. So it's a complex web of cause and effect relationships that there's no one size fits all. It's something that needs to be managed, yes, but at the same time, it's not something like you have to wipe out every single predator in the world, because that then knocks out the integrity of an ecosystem too. So it's something.
The ecosystem is so delicate,
yes,
and it can be influenced by the smallest thing. There's a great YouTube video called "How Wolves Changed Rivers."
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
I haven't seen the video, but I've read some articles and some stuff about that.
Basically what it is they introduce wolves into this area where there was a really big elk population, and the elk were eating so much of the natural grasses and flora and fauna and all that stuff to where they were getting sick and they had disease because there's so many of them. They introduced wolves, and the wolves started killing all these elk and moving them back up into the mountains. This change happened where grass started growing, trees started growing, rabbits started coming back, birds started nesting in these trees that now started growing, and this whole different ecosystem came, which in turn, the river, instead of going straight, started meandering and slowing down again, back to what they say was a natural type of flow for the river. And, obviously the elk hunters were mad that they introduced the wolves, and the lovers of the wolves were mad that there was legislation to try to kill more of these wolves. And basically what happened is nature fixed itself.
Yeah, that's it's I think the technical term is called a trophic cascade. Yes. Where the impact of an apex predator, so a top predator, and how it impacts all the other species within an ecosystem, and what you said is it will hopefully achieve the natural balance, like how things were before humans started interfering.
Yep.
And so that seems like a ideal place to be. Unfortunately, if you talk to any different person, they all have disagreements on what they think that's supposed to be because how it affects them. So like you just said,
Exactly.
people that, love wolves or basic wildlife and stuff like that, they want to see the wolves brought back and not, back from extermination where they almost were. And then you've got a lot of hunters who are upset because they're killing a lot of elk, or in, northern Wisconsin or northern Minnesota, people hate the wolves because they feel like they're killing all the deer. And this is a topic that I've got a lot of opinions on. And again, it's one that's probably going to piss a lot of people off. But I am a strong believer in management, right? Because when people came into North America, or at least Europeans came into North America, we just, in general, knocked the whole thing out of skew, right? We changed everything.
Yep.
And so it's never going to be able to go back to the way it was. That's just maybe it's a nice idea, but it's never going to go back because we just make an impact, no matter what humans have impacted it. So my belief is that there is a responsibility to manage it in some way. But at the same time, I personally would like to see it managed to try to someday get back to a relatively natural, relatively balanced to some degree state. So for me, I'm not in favor of exterminating predator populations.
Right.
I believe they do need to be managed, though. There has to be some kind of balance that is created, because you're going to have deer hunters who are pissed because they think all the deer are gone because of wolves, and I understand that, and I wouldn't want to be in that situation either. But I also think that there is value to predators on the landscape, and I wouldn't want to go to, the Rocky Mountains and there not be bears or mountain lions or wolves or whatever. I wouldn't want a totally sterile ecosystem in world, because that's not natural either. So that's my own set of thoughts. But
I agree 100%. Mother Nature is a very lean, and evolution is very lean. There's no waste. Everything has a purpose, and everything has its part. And like you said, when we came in and ruined it all, that threw everything out of whack. And then Mother Nature's continually trying to adjust to find a balance. And then when we go in and we think that we're better than Mother Nature, we are not. It's just like a dam in a river so people can live next to the water. That's not how nature's supposed to do it. There's floodplains for a reason.
right.
And I just feel that, you can kind of relate a dam to some of these problems. The water builds up and builds up and builds up, and then it has nowhere to go, and the problem just floods, and then it's huge. It's a way bigger problem than what it needs to be.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
There's a lot of examples of this kind of thing just going on.
Yep.
And it's just, man, the predator thing is just one that gets people really fired up. And I guarantee you I'll get an email or Facebook message from someone who's going to be pissed that we, didn't say kill every single wolf, or that, wasn't, I think balance in general. I want to look for moderation, some kind of balance. But there's going to be hardline, far either side, advocates on both sides of all these debates, whether it's captive deer, whether it's predators, whether it's any other political issue when it comes to anything, I guess. But in this case, deer. People are passionate about it, and I get it. I get people have different opinions. I wish, if nothing else, I wish more people could sit down and have conversations about it without getting nasty. I do some stuff with the National Deer Alliance and help them with some of their different media and social media and different things like that. So I see a lot of the comments posted there and like the debates that start there. And you just see people get nasty. And that happens on forums, that happens on Facebook pages, that happens everywhere. And people just start, they're not, it seems, not everyone, but there's a contingent, maybe it's a very loud minority, but there's a contingent in any of these debates that gets super fired up, isn't willing to listen to anyone else's point of view, and points fingers and screams and yells and says, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I wish there was just more, let's talk about it. Let's understand each other.
People are afraid of what they don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when people say, hey, I have this idea, oh, Jesus Christ, no way. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is how it, if we would just sit down and work together to fix some of these problems, everybody has to sacrifice no matter what. You are not, that's life in general. You're not going to get everything you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah. So, that's kind of the story of everything that's going on when it comes to it. This is like the headline of the whole deal. When it comes to deer politics, policies, problems in general, there's a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of different potential solutions. And lots of people get fired up about it because we love deer. We love deer hunting. And it gets us, we're emotionally invested in it. So it just causes a lot of contention. And, taking a step back to our earlier conversation when it comes to the captive deer debate, I understand that I don't understand everything related to that other side of the point of view. And so while I have a strong opinion at this point, I wouldn't decline if someone was like, hey, I have a different point of view. Let's talk about it. I would be open to hearing them out, and I'm open to a better understanding that. And I'm open to either maybe my viewpoints would shift a little bit, or maybe I would still feel the same way and we can just agree to disagree. But that doesn't mean I hate them. That doesn't mean that I'm completely discrediting them or saying that we should wipe them off the face of the earth. We're just saying things differently. So, moving on, I'd say this is going to be a long podcast because we.
That's
still
all
have
right.
some stuff
I
to
think
talk about.
people are going to appreciate it, and if they got to listen to it in two parts, who cares? These are the big issues, and they have to be discussed.
Yeah. I hope this is something that people are interested in. Because, we're not talking about how to kill big deer. We're not talking about something exciting like that. But I do think it's important to sometimes take a step away from the little part that matters just to me right now. How do I shoot this deer? How do I have some deer hunting success? But it's important to talk about the bigger picture issues like this that aren't fun maybe to talk about sometimes. They're not easy to talk about, but they will impact whether we can have the fun stuff in the future. So the next thing we talked about at the summit was hunter and agency relationships and relations. And this fits in perfectly with what we're talking about here. When it comes to the hunters want one thing and the agencies have another set of goals, and then everyone gets pissed at each other. So the speaker at the convention works with an agency that he used to work for. I think it was the Vermont Fish and Game Agency, I believe. And now he works for this larger national organization that represents wildlife agencies in general, as a larger kind of advocacy group of some type, or representative organization. And he just talked about the basic challenges, and the biggest thing comes down to communication. We had another talk about this on day 3 from a very controversial figure with some hunters. His name is Dr. Gary Alt, and he was in charge of the deer commission of some sorts in Pennsylvania in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I'll use his example as an example of this greater issue of hunter-agency relationships, and we can see where that goes. But so he was in charge of managing the deer situation in Pennsylvania at that time period. And what he shared with us is, at that time period, he was brought in because there was massive habitat issues because of very, very high, unnaturally high populations of deer. Like 80 deer per square mile, 100 deer per square mile, or something like that. Very high populations, and you would see that where there was, he showed a number of examples where they put parts of a forest in an enclosure. So there's 100 acres in an enclosure that deer can't get into, and then there's 100 acres that's open to the deer. And then they clear cut them both, and then they wanted to see how the forest would regenerate. What's the change in habitat? And within like 3 years, you'd see the enclosed portion had tremendous growth, thick as all get out, completely full. I mean, just nasty, huge, tall brush, trees, all sorts of stuff. When you looked at the side that had the deer, there was nothing. There was some grass. There was like no new tree growth. There was no new bush growth. I mean, it was just devastated habitat. I mean, this is an illustration of the impact that the too high of deer population was having on the overall population or on the overall habitat. And the issue is that if you've got that many deer and you damage the habitat that much because of an out of balance herd, you get exactly what you talked about 5 minutes ago, Dan. It's like this river that's getting dammed, and the river's dammed, and that water level rises and rises and rises. You get this deer population that's rising and rising and rising because there's no major predators, there's not enough hunting of does, and the habitat, though, isn't changing. So that deer population continues to rise and rise and rise until it falls, it breaks the dam, and that's when you get deer that are dying from starvation, or deer that are not as healthy, or reduced fawn recruitment rates because these deer don't have enough food to support healthy fawns. And they also had tremendous the age structure of their herd there was ridiculous. Something like 80% of all their deer that were killed were 1.5-year-old bucks. Like, just there was no mature bucks. So it was just tons of does, no mature deer, no mature bucks, and just a bunch of young bucks doing all the breeding. So it was just a very, and as I understood it from what he was sharing with us and from what I've heard from others, it was an unhealthy deer situation. But many hunters in Pennsylvania, they were seeing a lot of deer, and they liked that. And so I want to be careful here too, because I know there's going to be guys in Pennsylvania that are still pissed about this, because I see comments all the time. They hate this guy, Dr. Gary Alt, because they believe that he drove their deer population into the ground. Like, I'm still seeing people say that kind of stuff. So I'm sure there's probably someone in Pennsylvania listening right now that thinks that what I'm telling, which isn't my story, I'm just telling this guy's story back to you guys, but they're going to be pissed that we're talking about him and not saying he's horrible. I'm just sharing the viewpoint of what was discussed at the convention, was talking about the fact that his goal, what he described to us, was that this looked like a habitat and deer population issue that was out of balance, and it had to be brought back into balance to reach a natural and healthy place in the middle where hopefully the population could be healthy again, the habitat could get back to a relatively normal state, and that would result in healthier deer. And hopefully they could find a way to do this in a way that, hunters could still enjoy quality hunting experiences too, especially into the future, which was a risk if things continue to go down the drain. So, long story short, they decided after a whole bunch of discussions and debate and research that the best way to do this, or the only option they had to do this, was to increase the allotment of doe tags, so get more people to kill more does, bring the doe population down, and reduce the harvest of young bucks. So they put antler point restrictions into effect, as that was the only way they could keep all the young bucks from getting shot. They couldn't shut down the season, they couldn't do different things like that. So it was put some type of restriction. So Dr. Gary Alt had to go around the state talking about these changes, these proposed changes, and try to help people understand why they're doing it. And over the course of however long this period was, where they kind of did this tour of the state, it got super, super nasty. He got tons of death threats, and he was abused and yelled and screamed at and spit at, and it just destroyed a lot of ways. He said a lot of things in his life just kind of fell apart. He said it ruined his career in general. He knew that going into it because he knew this would be unpopular. But I wasn't involved in it. I can't say who was right, who was wrong, or what to believe and what not to believe. I'm just telling you what I heard. But I just think this situation is a perfect illustration of the hunter-agency relationship, where hunters, in many cases, you and me, we want to have a quality deer hunting experience. We want to see deer. We want to have, all those things. And then a lot of these wildlife agencies, they too want there to be deer in the habitat, because hunters are their greatest stakeholders and they pay the bills, and their job is to manage the wildlife in the interest of the public trust. But they also have to balance everything. So they can't manage just for one person or just one species at all times. They have to manage across a number of different needs. So they have to look at ecosystem stuff. Again, they have to look at balancing things to some degree. So that causes unpopular decisions sometimes with people like you and me. So that's what this larger discussion was about, was how can we as hunters try to better understand what they're trying to do, and how can the wildlife agencies try to better understand where us hunters are coming from, and how can we communicate better, and how can we work together better. So that was a big thing that was talked about. I don't know if there was any like major solutions that were discussed or that came out of it, but that's an issue that's just, it's contentious. It's happening everywhere right now. I don't know if you've seen, Dan, but like in Ohio, there's a lot of hunters in Ohio that are really upset about the deer population and where things are going and how the DNR there is managing it. There's a lot of people upset in Minnesota about how people are managing their deer population. They think that there's way too many deer being killed up in the northern parts of the state, I believe. So they're actually having an outside group audit their DNR, audit how they're managing the deer herd. And that happened back in Wisconsin, I think in 2010. Interestingly, they brought in Dr. James Kroll, who is another deer researcher, biologist, etc. And then they brought Gary Alt, this guy I just talked about. They brought him in as part of this audit team to audit how the DNR in Wisconsin was doing, managing it. So it's just something, it's going to pop up, it happens, and it gets people fired up.
I'm not going to say anything right now because I'm going to bring some of this stuff up on the next topic that we're going to be talking about. And I kind of feel it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. I think a lot of these things tie together. So is the next topic that you're thinking we're talking about hunter recruitment?
Correct.
All right, perfect. So then that next topic, which is hunter recruitment, was voted on the final part of day 2, was voted as the number one issue of concern for the National Deer Alliance. So, in general, if we want deer hunting to continue to be managed as a priority, if we want, what we do to be accepted, if we want there to be sustainable populations, if we want there to be places for us to hunt, if we want all of these things that are important to us right now, it's going to be hard to have those if there are significantly fewer deer hunters in the future, by virtue of the fact that we are the ones who vote and take action to protect these things. If there's no one who cares about that stuff anymore, no one's going to vote in favor of that anymore or take action or donate money to those things anymore. And then if there's no one who cares about this stuff, no one's going to take care of this stuff. So because of that, bringing new hunters into the fold in some way is an issue of top concern for the people at the summit, and I think for a lot of people. And if anyone listened to last week's podcast with Steve Ranella, we talked about this topic. And how some people, you and me talked about this a couple weeks ago. And so, my point of view on it was what I just said right there, right? It's important to continue bringing people into the fold because we need more advocates for our way of life. And if people don't experience it, they won't love it, they won't take care of it and support it. On the other side of the coin, which at one point I know you had shared with me, and I guess I'll ask you, I won't speak for you, but last week Steve Ranella talked about his brother's point of view was that, hey, I want fewer hunters because it's already hard to get good ground. It's already hard to find places to hunt. It's already hard to get a good deer. Why would I want more people out here screwing it up for me? So I know there's a lot of people who have that point of view too. So that was another topic of debate too. So what are your thoughts on that, Dan? Where are you at with this?
All right. So in order for a group of people to be heard and be strong is for them to unite. And what I keep going back to is, as hunters, let's say we take all the hunters right now. How many hunters do you know who, aside from me and you, is your uncle? Does he care about these things? Do my uncles and my friends who are the weekend warriors, who they go out, they buy their tags and they hunt deer and then that's it. They're not a part of anything else. I feel before we go out and say, hello, United States, we would love for you to come hunt. I think we need to educate the hunters that are out there, provide them with the statistics and the information so we can all be one giant voice, because there's millions of hunters out there that don't really I'm not going to say that they don't care. They don't care until it's too late. And I feel that we need to unite before we and have one voice, which is hard to do, but I feel like the National Deer Alliance is the first step in that direction. That we need to understand that we're not all going to agree, but we have to do what's right and get the communication lines open before we say, hey, everybody, come on. Because I'll be honest with you. If you tell me, hey, Dan, why don't you go out and take one person hunting this year, get them into hunting. That person right there is going to get an education as opposed to some dipshit out there who is, a weekend warrior, may not be ethically following all the, ethically hunting correctly, maybe not following all the rules and guidelines. Then what you have is a new hunter who is not following all the rules and guidelines, who is not hunting ethically because he's educated by someone else out there who thinks it's okay. So do I think that in order for us to move forward, we need more hunters? Yes. But we need to also have an education and God, what's the word I'm looking for the current hunters, a sense of urgency that says you need to be involved now more than ever before.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's so true. And I think a perfect example of this is, when the National Deer Alliance was created, there was a study, or they looked at some kind of statistics that looked at the percentage of, if you look at the different deer or the different hunting communities, like if you look at the waterfowl community, the duck hunting community, you look at the turkey hunting community, you look at the elk hunting community, and you look at the deer hunting community, and you say, okay, there's this many duck hunters. Here's the percentage of duck hunters who are members of Ducks Unlimited. If you look at the number of turkey hunters, here's the percentage of that number that's involved in the National Wild Turkey Federation. I can't remember what the actual numbers were, but it's something like 10, 15, 20, 30% of all of these different groups. A significant portion of all of those hunter groups or hunter populations are part of the conservation organization for their group. But for deer, there's over 11 million deer hunters involved in. Over 11 million deer hunters, and less than 1% of our population is involved in any kind of deer organization. By far the least of any other species out there. Yep. And it's indicative of exactly what you said, that people are too apathetic. They just don't care. If it doesn't affect me right now on my property, my deer, my situation, people just, like you said, they don't give a shit. As much as I hate to say that, more people need to care and not just look at what's happening with me, but look at the bigger picture. And I know I'm talking from my high horse right now or whatever, and I can be 100% better. I could do better for sure. I'm not always great at this either. It's easy to get, I just wrote a little thing about this a week or two ago, and I talked about conservation tunnel vision. This idea that, we get so focused on our piece of property, our deer herd, our bucks, our hunting, it's easy to forget about the larger picture. And that's not just a deer hunting thing or just a hunting thing. That's just a people in general. If a new tax doesn't impact me, I might not care about it or get upset about it. Or if a new regulation from, the government doesn't impact me, maybe I won't care, even though it impacts 30 million other people. I understand that's human nature, but I just hope and wish that more of us within the deer hunting community could start paying attention to some of these things, because they do impact us all.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be donating money to a specific, because, a lot of people think that if you're going to be a part of something that you have to spend money. Well, you don't. Sometimes we may ask for a vote, to take time out of your day to go vote for what's important, whether that is, an elected official or a law or a bill or something like that. But, or write your congressman or your House of Representatives person. But 1%, all right, focus on the people who are already hunters and get that voice louder. And then, because, I read in some articles, it's like, hey, we need numbers so we can vote. We have numbers. Educate the numbers that we do have to get them, get them active. Then we can start the recruitment.
I mean, I can't argue with your logic on that. Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree that we need to activate our base. Is, you know, if you're talking like what they'd say in politics, like we have our base, our current hunters. We need to get those people more involved. You and me, Dan, we need to get more involved. Hopefully, our listeners can get more involved. And I hope, if anything, comes out of this entire, you know, conversation we're having here, it's just the fact that, hey, there's some stuff happening. There's things happening that really should require your attention. You should be paying attention to these things. Think about these things. Think about how they might impact you in the future, or maybe they are right now. And to your point, you don't need to donate money. Maybe you join the group, or maybe you just participate in sharing your opinion more. Or, you know, there's all these different meetings that go on that wildlife agencies put on to get comments from the general public on new regulations or things like that. And in many cases, they get very, very small turnouts. But then they get tons of people getting pissed off about this new regulation, but then only like 1% of the population actually showed up to talk about it when they have these meetings to discuss the new regulations and ideas and things like that. So, I mean, find ways to get involved, whether it be show up for something like that, or donate money, or volunteer time, talk to a legislator. There's many different ways to get involved, and I think probably the first and foremost step, though, is just becoming educated on it, like pay attention to it, just so you understand what's happening.
And from a more cynical, maybe that's the word I'm looking for. If you're not doing anything, don't bitch about it. Shut up. No, honest, because I don't care. I don't care about you if all you're doing is bitching. If you are coming to the table with a problem, also bring a solution. That's what I do for my job every day. You know, there's no value in any part of life if you're just bitching, because at that, you're part of the problem at that point, or you're just in the way of finding a goal, or, you know, having a problem reach a goal, or finding a solution. So I have no time. Even people that I may agree with on certain topics, whether it's hunting related or political or whatever, what did you do? If you're not doing something, I have no time for you.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I agree. I mean, come to the table with your opinions if you want them, and your complaints if you have them, but let's talk solutions. Let's talk about it. Let's try to understand each other. Let's engage. I agree. Just going out there and throwing a fit doesn't do any good either.
And I'll be honest with you. Until I joined the National Deer Alliance, and you know, you helped me with this podcast be more involved, and through Wired to Hunt, you know, I've taken a little shift. You know, I had been a hypocrite in the past, saying, "Oh, the DNR don't know shit," and you know, they think they know what they're doing, but they don't. When in reality, a majority of these agencies, you know, they're not just trying to F you every day.
Right.
They have hunter interests in mind, because how do they make their money? From hunters.
Yeah. I think that's there's always going to be the people that are cynical or anti-government, anti-establishment, who just assume, right, like you said, that they're just trying to screw you over. I typically, not that I think that all governing organizations are not ever at fault. I think there certainly are plenty of ways that agencies are different. There's plenty of ways they can be improved, and we need to make sure we keep them accountable. All those things, yes, absolutely. But I tend to agree with what you said, Dan, that I don't personally think that these agencies are trying to screw us over. I think they're trying to do the best job they can to balance everyone's interests. But of course, it's hard to balance, you know, all the different interests. And I think I'll say one thing. While I don't think any of these agencies are doing the best possible job in the world, I would say that in general, they're doing a pretty darn good job, because let's take a look at where we were from a wildlife standpoint 70 years ago. You know, in the early 20th century, we didn't have anything. We didn't have any of these deer. We didn't have any of these elk. We were near extirpation of these species. And over the past 40, 50, 60 years, we've seen an unbelievable, you know, reestablishment of wildlife populations in this country. They're at tremendous levels, even though right now there's lots of concern about the fact that they're declining in some places and we're having some issues. The only reason we can complain about the fact that the harvest rate's down, you know, 10, 15% is because we've grown it to just such a great, incredible point where these populations are massive, at a point that no one's, you know, enjoyed since the 1800s.
In
So
any sorry to cut you off, but in any process, micromanagement is the hardest part.
yeah, very true. Very true. So I think, do we need to keep our agencies accountable? Yes. Do we need to make sure that they hear the hunter's voice? 100%, absolutely. Do we need to, offer strong feedback sometimes, offer solutions sometimes, ask for them to make adjustments sometimes? Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it's important, I think, for you and me, Dan, and all of our listeners to sometimes also try to look at the other side of the coin too and say, okay, what are they trying to do here? What does this mean from a big picture? How, to your point, how can we be part of the solution and not just a loud voice that's part of the problem?
Yep.
So there's that. So those are the four issues that were kind of had larger discussions earlier in the summit, and then after that, we then had a list of 15 high-level concerns that were then, including those plus more, that were voted on by the overall group to determine what the top 5 issues should be for the NDA to really focus on moving forward in the short term. So we've already kind of touched on these, but I'll just mention them again, and then if you want to touch on any of these anymore, Dan, we can. The number 1 voted issue was hunter recruitment. The number 2 issue was the impact of politics on deer management. Number 3 was habitat loss and landscape changes. Number 4 was the public perception of hunting by the non-hunting public and what that might mean for, the future of deer hunting. And then number 5 was the captive deer industry. So those are the 5 issues. And then the final part of day 2 was going through each one of those issues and then spending about an hour on each issue brainstorming action items. So what are actual things we can do to make progress on that issue? So
Do you think that we are making some of these things way more difficult than what they need to be? Because we've had a really good discussion, and it's kind of been, we haven't really shared any what's the word I'm looking for? Any advice or point of view from outside the hunting industry, outside like non-hunters or captive deer breeders. But it just seems to me that some of these things are very simple. Here is a way to get the ball rolling in the right direction. But instead, I just feel like because we're not 100% united, there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians, if that makes sense.
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Yes. I mean, there's a lot of simple things that can happen that could be done, but like you said, it requires unification and just like make a step forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge is that it's hard to get to that point because even within the deer hunting community, there's just a lot of different opinions on everything. And so, I mean, take for example, we the vote on these 5 issues, but then within each one of these 5 issues, there's a million different points of view about what that next step should be. And so I think doing an event like this, the summit, where we're encouraging people to get involved and asking people to get involved, that's a step in the right direction. But there's still a lot more to get done. And then the question then is, and what the challenge with this next part is that some of these things seem like simple, but at the same time, actually, determining a step that an organization or group of peoples can take that will make a meaningful difference, like an actual, like very clear cut, do X equals Y. Yep. That is sometimes easier said than done. So, for example, the number 1 issue was hunter recruitment. How do we address the issue of the fact that fewer hunters are getting into hunting and there's a large number of hunters leaving hunting faster than we're growing it? How do we address that? And there's a bunch of different ideas, but none of them were like a simple, easy fix. There's no way to flip a switch and all of a sudden, like, everyone understands how great deer hunting is and, hey, I want to get involved. To, like, something you mentioned a little bit earlier, Dan, the fact, like, if we're getting new people into hunting, and if you took someone hunting, you would take them out, you would educate them about ethics, you would educate them about the process, you would educate them about how to do it the right way, how to handle that animal afterwards properly, clean and gut and process that deer, how to appreciate it afterwards. You would talk through all these different things. But finding mentors to do that, to help new hunters, is pretty darn hard because everyone's focused on them. Everyone's focused on my day, my property. Yeah, I want new hunters to come out, but I don't want them to come to my spot. There's a lot of that. And then number two, even though we could say, well, we just need more mentors. Well, there's the challenges I just mentioned there. And then moving on, let's say even in a great world, we do get a bunch of new mentors. People like you or one of our listeners step up and say, yeah, I'll take someone out on a new hunt, on a first hunt. You take them out there, they learn all this stuff, they have a great day. But if you're not there to take them out the next day or the next weekend or the next weekend, those people, they'll drop off, because it's hard for someone who has no experience with deer hunting to go out once and then all of a sudden have all the tools necessary to become a lifelong hunter. They don't have a place to go. They don't know how to use a gun, or they might not feel comfortable going out in the woods by themselves in the middle of the night. They might not feel comfortable with one hunt and all of a sudden being able to gut an animal by themselves. So a lot of these things require not only a first-time hunt experience, but they require a long-term mentorship.
Someone to hold their hand a little bit.
Exactly. And that's an even greater ask for someone. So, I mean, just in that one example, like even if we think the easy solution is take someone out hunting, well, even that might not work in the long term. So it's like all these different issues have got this cascade of, but then what? But then what? And then what happens after that? And so, yes, we need to take action. We need to take the first step to even get to the next one. But it's just, man, few things are ever super easy.
Right.
So I don't know. So those are the 5 issues. We've talked a lot about hunter recruitment, I think. We could talk about 2 things here, Dan. Here closing things out, because we're already getting pretty long on the show. We could either talk through these 5 issues and offer any final thoughts on yours or my opinions on these, or I could walk through the top 3 voted action items for each one of these issues as voted on by the summit, and see if that's something that would be helpful for people to hear about, or that you and I might want to talk about. Or we can just close the thing up. What do you think, Dan?
Well, I think one thing we need to do is tell something to our viewers on what they can do to become involved, because the things that are popping into my head right now is what you said, like some of the hunting celebrities, no one was there to represent that side of the industry. Maybe not some of the big name owners of some of these companies. My challenge to the listeners would be to go to your favorite hunting celebrities social media page and ask them if they are a member of the National Deer Alliance, and maybe through friendly pressure we can get more of those people involved, because they rely on the resource more than to make money too. And then that's how it kind of snowballs. We have to do our part to not only get involved, but then pass the buck and say, hey, so-and-so, are you involved? It's very simple. All you have to do is go to their website and sign up.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that is absolutely the first step is getting involved in that capacity. And I do think that, regardless of, whatever, the thing with the National Deer Alliance is right now the National Deer Alliance is an organization to just try to get people involved and start talking about these things. So whether or not you agree on things that we've talked about with me or with Dan, we might have different opinions. Even if you completely disagree with everything I've personally said right now, you should still join the National Deer Alliance, just because that is that organization is going to be a medium for people to discuss these issues and have
their voice.
It's your voice, exactly.
Yep.
So make sure you're part of that, so you can make sure that your opinions on that are part of that larger voice. And so right now, the National Deer Alliance is still a fledgling organization. It just launched last summer, and I've been able to see some of the stuff going on behind the scenes, and I had no idea. There's a crap ton of foundational logistics that need to be taken care of on the back end for an organization like that just to get off the ground.
Yep.
So there's not been a lot of stuff that's happening from a substantial, the National Deer Alliance is standing up for X issue and has submitted these policy regulation or recommendations and has sent these lobbyists to the Congress. That's not happening yet, because it takes a ton of behind the scenes work just to get an organization like this started. So the organization is getting started. It's getting its feet, but it needs members. It needs every single one of you who's listening right now to join the group, and to start participating in that conversation. Every week an email goes out to the members of the NDA that does two things. Number one, it shares all the different news-related items regarding deer happening that week. So every different policy change in different states, every different issue of debate, every different controversy or update or regulation change, those things are covered every single week. So if nothing else, everyone should just be educated on that. Like, sign up for no other reason just to get that update, because we need to know about the things that are happening in our state or within the states we hunt or all across the country that might impact deer hunting. So that's the number one thing, is from a very small little piece of what they're doing, they're just helping educate. And then number two, they're asking questions. There's a survey every week, and there's different issues are polled and surveyed to get the membership's opinion on that issue, to start getting the voice better understood. And I know, given my participation with the National Deer Alliance, that when those polls are taken, then the folks working for the NDA go back on their side and they say, okay, let's look at these numbers. Let's look at what this means for the population of the Deer Alliance's members. And that is going to be factored into how decisions are made in the future, whether that be through, people sharing their opinions in the polls, or in this case, going to the summit and participating in that event where actively you can vote, and those things are actually determining the direction of this organization, which eventually it will be the largest deer conservation organization in the world, if not the largest conservation organization, because there's a lot of people behind this group right now. I mean, there just needs to be more people, just you and me, Dan, more regular hunters. We need to make sure more of us are getting to be a part of it. But the people from a conservation organization standpoint and all the major industry foundations and groups and companies, a lot of these people realize this is an important group and conversation that needs to be had. We just need to get more people to participate. And I hope that this long, drawn-out conversation about policies, politics, and problems, if nothing else, will just remind all of us that we can't just focus on what's happening on my back 40, but we also need to look at the bigger picture. And the one smallest tiny step of moving in that direction is to join the NDA.
Do you know how many current members there are?
I don't know the exact number.
Whatever it is, it's not enough.
It's not enough.
So,
I do know that.
Yep.
There's 11 million, somewhere over 11 million deer hunters. And for sure, I mean, I know that the Quality Deer Management Association has over 60,000 members. I know they announced that at the convention that they had this past weekend. I don't know what the Whitetails Unlimited number is, but 60,000 is 60,000 members of QDM, which has been around since the 80s. So, and that's not even 10% of the overall deer population. So I think, there's just, even if 1 million deer hunters, if less than 1/10 of all deer hunters would give a crap, that'd be 1 million members of the NDA. And that's a voice that will be heard. If you have 1 million strong members, that's something that is hard to ignore. I see no reason why there shouldn't be that many people who care enough to at least participate in the conversation.
Right.
So there's that, I guess. Big issues, big topics.
Big issues. And, it all comes down to if you want your way of life to continue to go the way it's going, you have to do something about it. Because if you're not, one day you're going to wake up and you're not going to be able to go hunting anymore. Yeah. And then I would be a felon because I would go hunting anyway. And
we don't want that.
We don't want that.
No. I mean, it's true though. It's scary, and I hate to keep harping on this, but 96%, I believe is the number. 96% of Americans don't hunt. They have no experience with hunting, and that means that there's only 4% of us who really care about this. And if we don't protect that, and if we don't work together, if we don't educate those who don't hunt, even if they don't become hunters, if nothing else, we need to make sure they're educated properly, so that they'll at least understand our way of thinking. If we're not doing those things, I mean, we don't even have a semblance of majority. We are the tiniest of minorities. So when it comes in a democracy like we live in, where majority rules, we're in a very tenuous position if all of a sudden our way of thinking, is not properly believed or respected in the greater population. So It's just stuff you got to think about, and I know it's a bummer of a conversation. It's not as much fun as patterning mature bucks, and we're not helping anyone today. Have a great deer hunting season probably, but sometimes you got to take a step back and talk about these things.
It's part of it.
Yes, it is. So, I think that probably is enough for us to cover today. There's a lot of other stuff going on. Every one of these issues has got a million different opinions and perspectives on it, and we both shared a couple of our opinions. By no means, am I, and I don't think you are, either one of us aren't claiming to know it all. We're not claiming to have the right answer. We just have our perspectives and our experiences that we can pull from. And I totally understand that some of you listening probably think some different things, and that's okay too. I get that. And I respect that. And I think if we can all agree to respect each other's different opinions, but at least have the conversation, we'll be moving in a positive direction. So I think that is my closing thought on deer hunting, policies, politics, and problems. Do you have anything else you want to close with, Dan?
Nope.
All right. Well, then, that is going to do it for us today on the Wired to Hunt podcast. There are some different articles that have been written already about the summit that summarize some of the different things I talked about and provide some details. I should have had my notes prepared and had some of these stats and things, but I just forgot. It's been a busy day. So if you want to see some more of those details, I'll put some links in the show notes today, and that'll be at wiredtohunt.com/episode 55. So go to wiredtohunt.com/episode 55 for the show notes and links to some more information about the summit and these issues. As always, we also would like to thank our partners who do help keep the Wired to Hunt podcast on the air. Big thank you to our partners Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Lacrosse Boots, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And finally, and most importantly, thank you to all of you listening in today. We appreciate it. We appreciate you listening to me and Dan rant, for maybe agreeing to disagree with us, for maybe agreeing with us on some things, for maybe reaching out and sharing your opinions and perspectives and being part of this larger conversation. Thanks for doing that. That's important, and we appreciate that. And as we talked about, I really do hope that you all will take the time to get more engaged with what's going on in the larger deer hunting community. Make your voice heard, get involved, and if you're not already, as Dan and I have both said, we'd encourage you to join the National Deer Alliance just to get better involved in that conversation. And finally, and with all that said, get out there, have an awesome week, spend some time outside, and as always, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.